We appreciate everybody taking the time to come in and join us. I want to thank the Battle River Research Group. They are a producer-driven group, and they serve 5 counties, including Painter, Stettler, Beaver, Flagstaff, and Camrose. They put on lots of wonderful courses. They've been doing, they're going to be doing some more webinars and such. And they're just a great resource. You can send your feed tests, all those kind of things through them. They're a really great resource for all of us farmers and ranchers in those counties. Our other partner is the Brownfield Community Library, which I am a board member of. We are just a tiny little hamlet of Brownfield, and we have a great public library. And our library has been trying to reach out and do some great extension things that we're able to do. So that's kind of fun. And then the third partner is just our ranch. My husband and I and our 3 girls have a ranch here at Brownfield, and so we partnered as well. My name is Cheyenne Younger. I'm gonna try to be your host tonight, so we'll see how that goes. So I apologize for any mistakes that I make already. This is my first kick at the cat. So anyways, we'll ask everyone to stay muted. You can choose to turn your video on or off. If you seem to be getting glitches, then it might work better to shut your video off. It just maybe depends on your internet. And so we'll see how that goes. But if everyone can just stay muted, it'll keep the noise to a minimum as we are recording this so that it can be on the Battle River Research website. If you have any questions, there's a chat option at the very bottom of your page. You can type out a chat to the group, or you can type a chat to someone privately. So if you're wanting to ask Tamara a question, you can send me a chat question, and I'll get Tamara to address that question for us. At the end of Tamara's presentation, we'll have a bit of time for some question and answers. And so that at that point, you can type into the chat your questions and I can read them off, or if you'd like to come on, I can just introduce you and then we'll turn your video on and you can ask those questions at that point. So now without any further delay, I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Tamara Quashman. She is an awesome lady. She's a veterinary practitioner. She's currently ranching with her husband near Bashaw. She's a real wealth of knowledge and a wonderful speaker. And so I'm just really excited to listen to her again. I've heard her many times and she's my favorite speaker of any vet I've ever heard. So I'm sure everyone will enjoy her. So welcome, Tamara.
Well, Cheyenne, thank you. And thank you for hosting this evening. It's certainly nice to have somebody navigating all the different parts of a Zoom call in the background. So appreciate you, breaking out of that box and, having a Zoom first with us tonight. And just happy to be back and presenting for a Battle River Research Group event. I've certainly enjoyed my sessions in the past. My only regret is that we can't be meeting in person, but that's the circumstances that we live in right now. But thankful that the technology exists that we're still able to get together. One benefit is that we can all be at home in comfy pants and we can all have our beverage of choice. So I'm just gonna leave it to you to guess what's in my cup this evening, and maybe at the end of the session, I can entertain your guesses for a very motivating prize as to what's in my cup. But tonight, wanted to spend some time talking about strategies that a person or a producer can put into place to help prevent BRD, so bovine respiratory disease, calf hood pneumonia, and scours. We work pretty hard to get these calves on the ground, and there's some different things that we can think of that will help get them to weaning, right? For the cow-calf producer, it's the pounds of beef wean that go on the truck that we're paid for. So let's spend some time thinking of ways and discussing, some different strategies and where they may fit into your operation. Like Cheyenne mentioned, I'm a producer myself, and so I hope that what we present here tonight is nothing too outlandish. And I will say that anything that we're discussing is nothing that we wouldn't consider using in our own operation or haven't employed that tactic before. And I really look forward to our Q&A session where we can hopefully be interactive and answer some of your questions as to what you may have going on in your own operation or what you've seen. I do have a couple disclosures for you this evening. One, this does not circumvent proper veterinary advice. So this is not a prescription or a means of avoiding a diagnosis from your attending veterinarian. Specific veterinary advice needs to be in the context of a valid patient-client relationship. So if there's anything that comes up, please reach out to your attending veterinarian. And then secondly, I am an employee of Zoetis, so the animal pharmaceutical company. So I work for them as a day job, but my opinions here this evening may not necessarily reflect that of the company. So with that said, let's get on to our content here tonight. So the first idea that I'd really like to put to you is that immunity is more than just giving animals shots. We often think that disease prevention comes in a vial or a box and that we can just give it to our animals. And while vaccines are an important tool in enhancing immunity, we really need to think at a systems level about immunity and disease prevention. Really, whenever disease develops, it's the result of an overlap of different factors. We have things on the host side, so the animal that becomes sick. There's the pathogen itself, or the bug, and then also factors from the environment. So all of these things coalesce to predispose animals either to health or disease. So it's more than just the bug. When things happen, we often think like, oh, must have had a bad strain of something. But usually there's several other mitigating factors that come together to result in an increased incidence of disease. Tonight, we're going to really focus on the host side of things that we can do within our animals to help improve their disease resiliency. And we'll talk a bit about this list in detail as we go through. But when it comes to the host, we think of things about genetics, about their nutrition, about whether they had a difficult delivery into the world or not. And we'll show some statistics that really point out that dystocia, or a difficult delivery, has a huge impact on the subsequent health of our calves. And then we're going to drill down on this idea of immunity, both passive immunity, so what they get from the colostrum, and then active immunity, what we're able to stimulate by either vaccination or natural exposure. And living in the times that we do with, COVID being forefront, there's certainly a lot of different information about how vaccines function or different expectations. So we're going to spend some time talking about what to expect from what's available on the market today for our calves. And I just really wanted to just take a quick tour through things of the other parts of that circle. When we think of the environmental factors, what is our stocking density, right? Like this is the equivalent of the ability to physical or social distance, right? When we have disease outbreaks, getting calves as far apart from each other is a critical measure in stopping the spread of disease. There's also things like weather and cold stress or heat stress, depending on the climate that you live in. Here in Alberta, definitely cold stress is more of a factor for most of our operations. And then things like air quality, if we have some different housing situations or even within our calf shelters, how that can impact their likelihood in developing disease. But there's some things about the environment that we just simply can't change. If I could change the weather, we'd certainly have some different weather patterns, but we're kind of at the mercy of Mother Nature. So we're definitely left looking to enhance or control the things that we can to make up for the challenges of the other things that we can't. But we can't discount these other factors. Working in the job that I do, I often, investigate lack of efficacy claims, right? Like we had scours despite having vaccinated. Well, when we really start to drill down on this situation, there's usually some other key factors at play beyond just the vaccination that was administered. And then when we think about the pathogen, so the fancy name for a bacteria or a virus or a microscopic parasite, right? So this is the bug. And there's different variants in virulence, so how apt they are at causing disease. And this varies amongst different strains. And this is certainly something that the variants of COVID have caused concern for, and its ability to induce disease. So this is something that's not as foreign to us as it was 12 months ago. And then also, not how virulent is a pathogen, but what are the sheer numbers? So that idea of concentration in the environment, or the pathogen load. What are our calves being exposed to? So those are just some things to consider on the environment and pathogen side. And then we're just going to jump into some things on the host side and looking at some different strategies for reducing our incidence of BRD and scours. You know, bull sales catalogs are stacked everywhere at our house right now. And if you're like my husband, you'll spend hours poring over them, deciphering their numbers and marking your choices. Then come sale time, you'll get caught up in a bidding frenzy and spend a few hundred to $1,000 extra dollars on the bull you thought was a great source of new genetics for your herd. But do you ever consider the bull's immune system as something to bid on? There are heritable differences in immune function. Genetics can account for as much as 1/3 in the variation in response to infectious disease amongst individual calves. So 30% of the likelihood of a calf to develop disease compared to its pen mate is based on the genetic hand it was dealt. So on the dairy side, there are genetic indexes available for respiratory and scours disease resiliency. We aren't quite there yet on the beef side, and that's mostly because we don't have the same level of production data and performance data tracking available to us. When we consider a lot of dairy cows that are going through the system, their output is measured on a daily basis and recorded. But we're making strides in that area on the beef side, and that data and those indexes are coming. I know Canadian Angus, they've launched their disease resiliency index, and so they're in the stages of collecting data on that. Australia Angus, they have a more established disease index, so be looking for that in years to come. So we're beyond, or another number to look at beyond, calving ease and, their milk scores, or, now we have foot scores, or their performance traits. Immunity is going to be something that we'll start to see pop up in these catalogs. So disease can also alter the expression of different genes. So not only can we influence the genetic hand that our calves are dealt, but the disease can affect how those cards are played. So disease can essentially turn genes on or off, or have a differential rate of expression. So it makes the consequences of illness extend beyond recovery. And really, a critical window is the first 60 days of life that these epigenetic factors, so like disease, they exert a big influence. If you think of their genetic code like a big breaker panel, and there's a lot of opportunity for genes to be turned on and off in that first 60 days of life. So if we can prevent illness, especially in that first 60 days, we're going to really allow that calf to live up to their genetic potential. If you've ever wondered why cold stressed calves seem to get more sick than herd maids that weren't cold stressed, well, there's actually a physiologic reason for this. This is because the genes that code for stress receptors on white blood cells become upregulated when a calf is cold stressed when it's young. So whenever that calf has a stressful stimulus in the future, like at weaning or a long haul, or getting adjusted to a bunk, those stress receptors, which you can think of as brakes on a white blood cell, so the key cell of the immune system, they have more breaks. So a little bit of stress is going to impact that calf way more and make it more immunosuppressed than a calf that did not have that cold stress as a calf. So to me, that's just fascinating that these things that, you know, we experience or notice as cattlemen actually has a physiologic basis. And that's related to the differential expression of genes. So really, don't let disease handcuff the genetic potential of your calves. So, you know, these strategies that we'll talk about really are important when we consider the critical nature of that genetic influence within the first 60 days of life. You know, some other things to consider along the genetic front is that hybrid vigor is apparent in immune function as well. Calves that are crossbred tend to get sick less than purebreds do. And then, you know, within the purebred lines, we can start to see these different indices that help us select for more disease resilience. But something to consider in your operation, if you've been facing a lot of disease challenge, is considering an outcross. You know, we can spend a lot of time on the merits of hybrid vigor, but this is just one strategy. You can change up your bull power to perhaps make your treatment record logs just a little less shorter. So just something to keep in the back of your mind. Another key heritable trait that we need to consider is calving ease. You know, we're going to jump into dystocia here in a minute, but calving ease plays a huge role in calfhood wellness. So when we look at dystocia, so a difficult birth, this is the single most important predisposing factor for disease and death in calves. So the majority of calf losses on beef cow-calf operations, about 2/3 of the losses occur within the first 24 hours of life. Dystocia is, you know, the major killer of calves. But then, you know, calves that survive a difficult delivery, they're then 4 times more likely to die within the first 20 hours than those that have an unassisted delivery. And a lot of that is due to metabolic derangements like metabolic acidosis, and that causes them to be less likely to get up and nurse and have that important colostrum. And also when they're in an acidotic state from having a prolonged birth, that pH change also impacts how well their immune system can function, as well as other enzyme activities. So clearly these calves are high risk and require some additional consideration. So if we can prevent difficult deliveries by one tactic of, you know, having some calving ease built into our bull and both cow selection, because we got to remember that the dam's birth weight, you know, contributes 50% to that calving ease as well. It's not just a factor we can pin on the bulls, but that's something that we need to be mindful of. And we don't always consider calving ease as preventing disease, but there is a clear relationship between the start that a calf gets in life and its likelihood of developing disease. So let's take a moment to think about the impacts that pregnant cow nutrition has on calf health. And really over the last number of years, there's been, you know, changing perspectives on mid-gestation nutrition. You know, in years gone by, I thought that, you know, that mid-pregnancy period was a time where we could cut back on our mineral supplementation or maybe supply a lower quality, less bioavailable mineral, or, you know, have them on the lower quality feed stuff. But I'd like to take a moment to consider the importance of the nutritional status of the mama cow. And really the role of nutrition on immune function cannot be understated. I mean, you can have the best vaccine with the slickest technology, but if you administer it to a cow with nutritional deficiencies, her response is going to be limited. It's kind of like having a really cool bike, but not putting air in the tires, right? Sure, you can still ride that bike, but it isn't going to take you as far as fast, and it's going to take a lot more effort to get there. So something to think about is the impact of providing protein supplementation mid-pregnancy. There's studies that show that calves born to supplemented cows had significantly less thickness once they were in the feedlot. And then similarly, calves born to cows supplemented throughout the second half of gestation with a chelated trace mineral supplement had higher colostral transfer than those calves born to cows that were on an inorganic supplement, right? Like we saw this in higher IgA, so a type of antibody levels in the calf at 12 hours, and then at IgG, so a systemic class of antibodies at 30 days of life. So, those effects of what we're doing during gestation on our cows is playing a role in the protection that our calves have as they grow. And so, consider for a moment how you typically manage the cows after the calves are weaned or prior to third trimester. Typically this period has been thought of as a time where we can have that cow coast, use up some of the dormant pastures, or graze on crop residues. And that for sure can be an economical way to feed that recently weaned cow. We just need to be cognizant that any deprivations during that period can have a long-term impact on that calf that she's cooking. So we just, that mid-gestation nutrition, has a critical role in the health of the calf. So just something, again, to put on your radar if you're struggling with calf wellness. It's not just a question of reaching for, a different vial or a different drug. We do need to think of things as a whole comprehensive picture. If you leave here this evening with one take-home message, the single most important thing that a cow-calf producer can do to impact the health of calves is ensure that they get enough colostrum. So maximizing colostral transfer is critical. Of all the things that we can do to enhance immunity, it is really hard to outdo Mother Nature. And the benefits of colostrum consumption are literally pages and pages of benefits when we look at the advantages that a calf that receives adequate or excessive amounts of colostrum has over those that are deficient. Like, it truly is liquid gold. And while we often focus on the antibody content of colostrum, there are a whole list of lipids and vitamins, trace minerals, hormones, and maternal white blood cells. So these white blood cells that were derived from the dam that are transferred into the colostrum that are then absorbed by the calf. And these are this whole list are critically important to that calf getting off to a good start. At last count, there are at least 169 different entities within colostrum. So it's really a complex elixir of life that's really hard to replicate outside that cow's udder. So if you're ever thinking, is it worth getting that cow in and milking her colostrum for the calf? The answer is always yes. This is not a knock against the colostrum replacer or supplement products available. They are certainly a great thing to have in the toolbox and adequate to sustain life, but there are some factors that just don't survive the preservation process. And those are needed for the calf to not only survive, but to thrive. So, that idea that fresh is best really rings true for colostrum. And the second place choices would be the commercially available supplements. Again, not a knock against them. It's just hard to outdo Mother Nature. So we have our golden rule for colostral intake. So really to ensure adequate passive transfer, So enough antibodies in colostrum being provided to a calf. A calf needs to have 2 liters, or roughly 2.5% of their body weight, of good quality colostrum in the first 4 hours of life. And then a total of 4 liters, so 5% of their body weight, within the first 12 hours. And that early window is critical. It's thought that their gut is open or able to absorb those antibodies intact for the first 24 hours, but really it drops off dramatically after the first six hours. And so if we can get good colostrum in a good amount into them in the first 4 hours, and then really following up within the first 12, that calf is going to be well set up to have adequate passive transfer. So just keep this in mind, that 2.5% of body weight within the first 4 hours is huge. And even if they can get into them within the first 2 hours, that really has a benefit. But when you look at our typical management windows, how often we're able to look at those calves and determine if you can aim for them having that colostrum in them within the first 4 hours, your calves are going to be in good shape. So then what's an easy way to predict failure of passive transfer, right? Not everybody has the ability to draw a blood sample and do a total protein on the calf to see what they've absorbed. So how can we predict or pick out those calves that are more likely to not get enough colostrum? And fortunately, there is a really easy way that if you have at least one hand, you can be able to perform on your calves. And so this quick test is looking at their suckle reflex. And so if you have a calf that's born, so they're about 10 minutes or more old, you can check their suckle reflex. And that's just, my nice little miming action, but all you have to do there is take your fingers and stroke them along the roof of their mouth, along the hard palate, and see what their tongue does. If they have a really good response and that tongue curls up along your fingers and they kind of start to posture their head like they're going to nurse, it's likely that calf is going to stand and nurse by 4 hours. Conversely, if calves with a weak suckle, so you put it in there and you're moving and it's just kind of like a little pancake in there and they're not moving their tongue at all, those calves with weak suckle reflexes were 40 times more likely to not stand and nurse or have that failure of colostral transfer by 4 hours. So just keep that, you're always carrying your hands around, so it's easy to check those calves. Or, if you have a calf that you've pulled and you're wanting to see how feisty is this calf, a suckle reflex is a good test on them. And really kind of when in doubt, provide colostrum for them. So whether that's, if you pulled the calf and you still have the dam restrained, milking her out and providing that to the calf, or using a colostral supplement or replacer on those. So just a quick test is that suckle reflex. Because really, the effects of inadequate colostral immunity, so when they don't get enough passive transfer, is really hard to overcome. Really, like these calves that don't get enough colostrum, they are almost 10 times more likely to get sick before they're weaned, and they're 5 times more likely to die before weaning. So we don't stack the deck in their favor when they don't get enough colostrum. And then when we look at the impacts on their health beyond weaning, those that were determined to have inadequate passive transfer in these large surveillance studies, they were 3 times more likely to be treated for pneumonia once they reached the feedlot. And really, it's a bit of an uncomfortable truth, especially when I consider our operation. And, we kind of pride ourselves on, making sure that those calves are standing and nursing and, doing everything we can to help them get off to a good start. But failure of passive transfer is more common than we think. They did some surveillance in some well-managed herds that did not have apparent disease outbreaks, but they found that 16% of those calves were marginal to failing their passive transfer. So that's just something, I guess take-home message from that is that we all can be doing more to ensure that that they're getting enough colostrum. Or just because we don't see an obvious problem doesn't mean that something isn't lurking below the surface. Also, as another little thing to pump the tires for making sure that our calves get adequate colostrum is that some is good, but more is better. There's been some exciting work that's come out of the University of Saskatchewan that shows that the opposite situation we often look at what happens when they fail to get enough, but what happens if we give them more? And there was a positive impact of at least 20 pounds on weaning weight for calves that were given an additional 100 grams of IgG as newborns. And so this is something that is interesting, that we can actually not only prevent disease, but we can help enhance performance. So I'll step down off my soapbox on the colostrum for right now. But, when we think of if there's any one critical intervention that we can do, it's making sure that those calves get enough colostrum.
Hey, Tamara, I'm going to stop you for 1 second. We have a question that has to do with colostrum.
Yeah, for sure.
It's from Shirley Norman. It says, "Hi, Tamara. I was wondering if you can speak to colostrum quality and consistency, viscosity when dosing for 2.5% body weight. Just thinking of the difference in colostrum dilution, dairy colostrum versus beef. I would assume a higher volume will be required if using a supplement from dairy cattle."
Absolutely. Yes, that's a great question. And so these rules of thumb are based on kind of like 150 grams per liter of IgG. So depending on what our different things we're able to measure, whether we're looking at a colostral supplement or our sources. But yeah, generally, dairy cow colostrum is more dilute. So we need to adjust accordingly. And there's some different, like a Brix refractometer, so something that's used in winemaking that can be used to estimate the amount of IgG within colostrum. Generally, our beef cow colostrum is quite concentrated. So that body weight calculation is very appropriate for them. If you're using dairy colostrum, you'd probably need to increase that by about 25%. The only thing that we need to be careful of is that we're not volume overloading those calves. So you may need to break that up into 3 feedings over that first 12 hours versus 2. But yeah, it's very important to recognize the quality of colostrum. And then also when we look at our colostral replacers, they're not all created equal. So always look at more than the price tag. You want to make sure that you're giving at least 100 grams of IgG when you're using a colostral supplement. So just each product will have their IgG content written in grams at some place on the package. So use that as a guideline for what you're supplementing. But great question. Yeah, long-winded way of saying yes. If you're using dairy colostrum, it's going to have a lower concentration, and you'll need to give more. The exact amount, it would depend on how much you're, what the actual content is. But I think if you increase it by 25%, you'll be in reasonable shape. But one last, climbing back up on my soapbox, we do need to be careful with outside sources of colostrum when we're getting it from dairy. You're going to want to make sure that the herd health status of that dairy, because we certainly can introduce some things from dairy animals into our herd. So my hierarchy is, if you have the dam available, that calf gets colostrum from mom, then a colostral replacer, frozen colostrum from your farm is in third place, and then a dairy source colostrum would be fourth, and maybe a distant fourth in mine. But that all depends on the logistics of where your operation is located. But just certainly, we just need to approach dairy source colostrum with caution as a potential biosecurity control point for our operations. All right, so let's talk a bit about a condition that every cattle producer has dealt with at least once in their lifetime, and this is calf scours. You know, the neonatal diarrhea, and it can be caused by a variety of pathogens. So the bug can be one of several things. You know, in the first week of life, it's often an E. coli. As those calves, you know, get to, you know, a week to 10 to 2 weeks old, it's often a rota or coronavirus. And then, you know, we see other things crop up as they age, like the cryptosporidia and the coccidia. But it's a variety of pathogens. But regardless of you know, what specific bug we're talking about 1% of all calves born die from scours. And then 80% of calf deaths within the first 3 weeks of life is due to scours. So that's a major player in the dead piles that no one likes to have on their operation. And so those are the more obvious outcome. But calves that do have scours are, you know, have a performance impact. In my next slide, I think I'll give you a very good visual indication as to why these calves weigh less at weaning. The one study that I've referenced here, calves that had scours were 208 kilograms on average at weaning versus 217 kilograms in herd mates that were not afflicted with scours. And then when we look at calves that have scours, they're at a higher risk of pneumonia. You know, so there's these different connections that we don't often think of. And then when we look at this last point, you know, have you ever considered the impact that calf scours has on age at first calving? So this stat does come from the dairy side, but work has been done to show that for every day a heifer calf requires treatment for scours, she'll calve 7.5 days later. So a calf can be born a whole cycle late due to the fact that its mom had scours as a calf. And you know, when we think about this in the context of a beef herd, right? If you have a calf that's born a cycle late, that's 40 to 50 pounds less calf you'll have at weaning. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're looking at your treatment records and then making your replacement calf selection, right? So it's just some food for thought, and, you know, kind of some different criteria to have. I know for us at our place, we make a note of any heifer calf that we have to treat within the first 60 days of life, and they don't get to stick around as a replacement. You know, it's tough sometimes when you're making those selections and you have a very nice looking heifer that you do send to town, and you know, full disclosure, it wouldn't be the first time that my dear husband and I have argued about that, but it's really paying off in the wellness of our herd by culling or making our replacement decisions in that manner. So just keep that in the back of your mind when you have these early calfhood bouts of disease. You know, when you look at, you know, kind of a three day average of sickness for a case of scours, that moves, you know, her potential first calving date back by a whole cycle. So I wanted to give you this visual of what the viral agents actually do to the lining of the GI tract. So on the left, we have the nice, healthy, normal villi that line the intestines, and that they're producing enzymes and providing surface area for absorption. And then in the middle are villi that have had rotavirus damage. So they are blunted at the top. You can see that the little finger-like projections are not as long. And it's at the tips of the villi that the digestive enzymes are made. So the calf will have impaired digestion until those tips regenerate, which can take up to 10 to 14 days. And then on the right is coronavirus. So this really decimates the villi. So with these images in mind, it's easy to see why those animals don't gain as well as their healthy herd mates. They may get over the disease episode, but they have some long-lasting consequences because it just takes time to regenerate back to that normal villi if they ever reach the same number that they had prior to disease. So again, rotavirus, coronavirus, and E. coli represent the major pathogens that are involved with scours, especially in calves less than 2 weeks old. There are some others like Clostridials, Salmonella, and then Cryptosporidia and Coccidia, some different little parasites that also can be implicated. So let's talk a little bit about some things that we can do to help reduce the incidence of scours, or think about why we vaccinate the cows for calf scours, right? We consider scours a disease of management, but like I had said at the outset of our session, there's some things about the management that we simply can't change. We can't change the weather. Land prices being what they are, there just isn't enough land base to allow for proper physical distancing or more safe stocking densities, or the different areas don't melt off for turnout pastures. So we are left to the mercy of enhancing our things on the immunity side for both the cow and the calf. So we vaccinate the cow to protect the calf from scours, to enhance antibody production in the cow, which she'll then move into the colostrum. So in the weeks preceding the delivery of her calf, she is going to selectively concentrate antibodies from her bloodstream into the milk gland. And it's usually at about a 4 times ratio. So whatever in her bloodstream for antibody concentration, there's a 4-fold increase into the colostrum. So if we can vaccinate the cow, we can then increase the amount of antibodies that the calf is going to receive. So when we think about this thing, there's a few things that have to happen when we vaccinate the cow. We have to actually get the vaccine into the cow. She has to have an immune response to it. It then has to make it into the colostrum, and then the colostrum has to make it into the calf. So there's certainly room for error at each of those steps, but it does represent a good way to enhance the passive immunity of the calf. There's also a secondary benefit of vaccinating the cow in that we can reduce the pathogen load going into the environment, because cows that are vaccinated are going to shed less of the causative viruses and bacteria into the environment. So primary effect is to increase the antibody production, and then a secondary effect is that cow is actually shedding less of the pathogen into the environment, because the fact is the bugs that our calves are exposed to oftentimes are from other herd mates, from older animals in the herd, from cows in the herd. Cows do tend to shed more viruses when they're pregnant and in early lactation. I've been told that it's stressful. I have a first calf heifer date of July 20th, so I'll let you know how that goes. But certainly those cows are a common source of the pathogens that we typically see. They can be introduced from herd addition, but oftentimes they're just endemic and the tax of being a bovine in Canada. So yes, we hope that those antibodies are then passed on to the calf through the colostrum. And like many things in life, timing of these scour vaccines is important. we need the highest levels of antibodies at the time the cow is making her colostrum. And this happens from 5 weeks pre-calving down to 2 weeks pre-calving. That's when she's building that colostrum and is moving into her udder. So we really need to have that increased antibody levels in her bloodstream as a result of vaccination coinciding with colostrogenesis. And so different products that are available on the market have different timing. And so there's, different factors of the vaccine that determine how long it takes to reach that maximum concentration. And so whichever product you decide to use, I'm most familiar with ScourGuard, like both on a professional basis, that's Zoetis's Scour vaccine. And then on a personal basis, that's what we're using here at home in our own herd. But regardless of which one you use, make sure that you're aware of the label instructions, because those timeframes that are on the label are based on knowing how long it takes for that cow to respond to the vaccine and have those maximal antibody levels. So yeah, just a caveat for following the label directions, and depending on your operation, there's going to be different timing that works better for your schedule. And this is just a plug to say that if you're giving one dose of a scour vaccine in October when you preg check and you don't calve till the end of March, you're not getting a lot of value out of that administration. It does need to coincide with the time that your cow is building her colostrum. Gosh, I might as well just stay up on my soapbox for this whole session. So what one strategy is to vaccinate the cow to increase her antibody levels and then have those transferred to the calf. There's another class of products out there that are antibody supplements. So these are things like First Defense or Triflex, and these are products that contain freeze-dried preparations of antibodies or immunoglobulins, and these can be derived either from cow colostrum or from hyperimmunized chickens. So, well, I guess from the eggs from hyperimmunized chickens. So you just want to, check and see what the source is. So really, in the steps of what we're trying to do, like with Scour's vaccines, we're, vaccinating the cow, colostrum, antibodies to calf. This skips those first two steps of the cow of having to administer a product to the cow to then get into the calf. We're giving the product directly to the calf. And so these products do need to be given to the calf within that first 12 hours of life as well, while they have the ability to absorb those antibodies out of their GI tract. And so this is a good way to help provide some additional antibodies. But in my mind, there's a bit of a trade-off with these products, is that they don't contain the other beneficial factors of fresh colostrum. So my word of caution about antibody supplements is don't use them in favor of having good colostral intake. This is a great thing to add on if you have a specific diagnosis or you're facing a specific problem and your colostral transfer is already being insured. So don't displace colostrum in favor of an antibody supplement. Excuse me, maybe I poured my cup a little strong here this evening. So with our antibody supplements and our Scour's vaccines to the cows, we've been talking about passive immunity. So things that the calf just absorbs, and it's not an active immune response. So when we talk about active immunity, we're talking about stimulating that calf's own immune system to have a response against this invader. And so, stimulating active immunity is also important. That passive immunity that they get from the colostrum, that protects them for about the first 3 months of life. But there is a window where their passive immunity is waning and their their own immune system is ready to start responding, but there is a critical window where those calves are really susceptible to disease. So this curve just kind of shows that. So the hash line is the concentration of maternal antibody that they get. So it spikes up at birth because it absorbs from the colostrum, and then it slowly decays over weeks to months after they're born. For a calf to be able to respond to an injectable vaccination, those maternal antibody levels that are circulating in their body need to drop below a certain threshold. We talk about maternal antibody interference. There's a mechanism that those antibodies that are circulating through the calf's body will actually limit their ability to respond. And so we have this window of maternal antibody interference where if we give an injectable vaccine, the calf won't respond to them. And so we want to be able to vaccinate them so that the calf's own antibodies and their own memory cells are in place to fend off disease. But we need to time it for when those maternal antibodies have dropped off. But this window, between where their antibodies drop off and that they're able to respond is a critical period where their defenses are lowered. And this is often where we see disease breaks as their maternal antibodies wane before their own protection has a chance to catch up. So this is a challenge, particularly that is faced by young calves, right? So what do we do about that? And really, what we can do is present the immune system with a vaccine by a different route. And so this is really where the intranasal vaccines come to play. I'm just going to back to my my previous slide. Our challenges in really young calves with injectable vaccines are maternal antibody interference. And then there's this idea or concept of dominant antigen interference. Dominant antigen interference is when a calf responds selectively to the biggest threat. So when we give a combo vaccine by injection, they're going to selectively respond to the IBR fraction of that vaccine and have a diminished response to the other fractions. This is, this dominant antigen is really apparent when IBR and a Mannheimia are given together, but it can also be when IBR and our clostridials are administered alongside each other. So in calves, we really need to think about how we're delivering those antigens. And it's by this mucosal route. So putting it up the calf's nose at the site of where those pathogens can enter is our best way at getting around maternal antibody interference in these young calves. So we'll just roll through this one again and talk about mucosal vaccines in the context of protecting against BRRG or pneumonia. So we can get around that maternal antibody interference that's circulating in the calf's bloodstream by giving them a vaccine in their nasal passages. Really, the calf's own immune system really becomes fully mature at 5 weeks, and then will eventually reach those protective titers against disease. But there is that lag time. So it's always a trade-off between when their passive immunity dips down and when their active immunity catches up. So let's take a look at public enemy number one when it comes to bovine disease. Pneumonia is the largest cause of death in calves from 3 weeks to weaning. So this is kind of the scourge of the beef industry, and it costs the industry millions of dollars a year. So when we think about what agents are at play, or what really kicks off a case of pneumonia in a calf. Really, by and large, it's a virus that kicks off the infection. It does damage to the lining of the upper respiratory tract, and it helps it kind of denudes these little cilia that are normally sweeping out other bacteria and pathogens. And so with that barrier damaged by any one of these viruses, so BRSV, so bovine respiratory syncytial virus being the major player in young calves, the virus does the damage, and then bacteria like Mannheimia hemolytica, which are just normally hanging out in a calf's nasal passage, can then get down into the lungs where they normally couldn't before, and they set up these pneumonias. So the nice salmon pink is normal healthy lung, and then this is pneumonia damaged lung. So we have consolidation and discharge. But the important take-home message is that in our young calves, it's a virus that opens the door for the bacteria to get down into the lower airways. You know, there's different stressors that come in at different levels. You know, so if we have cold stress, weather stress, nutritional stress, those viruses can just, you know, gain a foothold and then set up shop for the bacteria. And then that results in what we see clinically as bovine respiratory disease. So we, you know, see the fever, the difficulty breathing, and then the toxins from the bacteria ultimately cause death. It's important to understand what is starting off the disease, because if we can intervene at the first level, then we can really limit the number of cases of pneumonia that we see. So really, by and large, every BRD case is initiated by a viral infection, and then the bacteria that are normally limited to the nasal passages can then get to the lower airway. So if we can target and have targeted control against these viruses, we're really going to limit the number of cases of BRD that we see. And it's just important to, again, keep this in mind, because sometimes when we do the diagnostics, we just submit for a bacterial culture and we don't look for those viruses. So we blame the bacteria and start to think of things we need to do to focus on the bacteria, when really we need to take it back a step to that foundational cause or initiator of the disease. This slide, let me orient you, is some cases of pneumonia within a large herd as calves aged, or based on the days of age of the calf. So here we see some spikes within the first 2 months of life, and then we start to see more cases as those calves get older. And what these levels represent, so if we're seeing pneumonia when they're less than 2 months old, we really need to think of these being related to failure of passive transfer. So those calves just did not get enough colostrum to have that protection from their mother to get them through that period until their own immune system could respond. So those early ones, if that's where you're seeing your spikes, we really need to be thinking of things that we can do to enhance passive transfer. And then if we see these pneumonias here kind of while the calves are in the grazing period, you know, in that 3 to 5 month mark, you know, we see these calves with pneumonia here. That's when their own maternal antibodies are declining. And so if we're seeing them there, we really need to think about what we're doing at spring turnout time to help protect them through the remainder of their nursing period. So just depending on when you're seeing the bulk of disease challenge or cases on your operation will really help form what your strategy should be in controlling it. But like I had mentioned before, one way to get around that maternal antibody interference and stimulating a response in those calves, despite them having circulating levels of antibodies is a mucosal vaccine. So these are the intranasals. So we'll kind of use Inforce as our representative. But one way to get around that maternal antibody interference is to give it on the mucosa. So the systemic antibodies aren't going to neutralize what we administer there, and they're going to have an effective response. And so with something like Inforce is targeted against 3 of the main viruses, BRRG, which we talked about being the major initiator of pneumonia in calves, and then IBR and parainfluenza, so the PI3. So we're really stimulating a robust immune response locally or on those nasal passages. So we're really setting them up for success. So if you have, going back to this graph, if you're seeing cases of pneumonia here in those first 60 days, doing something like an intranasal vaccine early on in life, can help stimulate their active immunity. So we can come in, first day of life and give them Inforce to help really enhance their own active responses and work on things to help with their own passive transfer as well. And then at branding time, we can look at doing some different things, whether we give Inforce at that age or the systemic injectables, at 2 to 3 months of age, because by then their own maternal antibodies are waning. So we get a better response to the injectables at this age here, right? So if we think first 2 months, we need to be doing something at birth. And then if we're seeing a lot more later in the nursing period, really looking at what we're doing at branding. But here's another little kicker. If we give something to the calves at birth, we can get a booster response with what we do at branding. So there's some different options and combinations that are available out there. So you don't just have to be experiencing pneumonia during these first 2 months to see a benefit of giving something within that first few hours or first few days of life. So if you're struggling out here, if this is where you're seeing your pneumonia cases, there's a couple steps upstream that we can look at implementing some strategies in. And, there's various products available out there, and there's some that may be a better fit for your operation than others. But, our recommendations certainly depend on when you're typically experiencing your problems. So just wanted to revisit the idea that there's several factors to consider when looking at protection from disease, and it's more than just giving them shots. The products that are out there are certainly good tools to have in the toolbox, but when it comes to things like scours, you're not going to necessarily vaccinate your way out of a problem. It will help reduce incidence and severity, but we need to think of things at a systems level and look at more than just one strategy for controlling disease or reducing BRD and scours. So, we covered a lot of ground here in the last hour, but I'm certainly happy to entertain questions and just kind of give you, for what it's worth, my opinion. So thank you for your attention. And Cheyenne, I'll turn things over to you to let me know if any questions have come in.
Thanks, Tamara. That's great. So we do have a few questions. Ooh, there we go. So we answered the one about colostrum. And then there was someone asking if you could just repeat the comment about the replacements in the first 60 days, if they'd had scours in the first 60 days. I kind of answered them, but yeah. I'd like you to confirm that if you could, please, for everyone.
Yeah, the stats on, or just the idea of what we do for culling.
I think the stats, and then maybe that as well. Either way, like both would probably be great, I think.
Yeah, so just the idea that, or the concept that within the first 60 days of life, we have that control panel of all the genes that an animal has being turned on and off. And so if they have either BRD or scours, we're going to, selectively, turn off some genes that are important for performance. So, we really set the ceiling of what that calf ultimately can go on to achieve. So for us at our place, we keep track of, all calves that we have to treat, but with an important critical eye on any heifers that we have to treat during those first 60 days, because we, if given the option, we'd rather keep one that was not treated over one that was, because we do see decreased milk production in calves or heifers, specifically heifers. Steers aren't milking yet. We're not that advanced, but we, on the dairy side, calves that have BRD, they produce 500 kilograms less of milk in their first lactation. It also, when we look at scours, for every day that they're treated, it moves their date of first calving back by roughly a week. So if you have a case of scours that you treat for 3 days, that calf is going to calve a cycle later, right? So when you look at, subsequent weaning weights, if you retain her in the herd compared to a calf that didn't have scours, just based on a calf being 21 days older, that's 40 to 50 pounds of weaning weight that you're giving up by keeping a calf that has had scours. So I hope that that circles back enough, but there's other stats out there, but those are the ones that I keep in mind. So for a case of scours, like, okay, that could move her calving date back from what she would have, or compared to calves that her herd mates that didn't get sick. And these are ones that look healthy at come weaning time, right? So this is where the argument with my husband and I started. Like, well, we treated her, she's got to go. It's like, but she's not my favorite cow. It's like, nope, she doesn't get to stick around. So, ask me in a few years, one, if I'm still married, and two, if, how the health parameters of our herd is going.
Okay, so the next question is from Jackie Rodbing. It says, is Cowbite's recommendation for protein up to date for mid-gestation? I feel like that's a question I had as well.
Yeah, that's I can't speak to Cowbites, but I can the level of protein supplementation that was given in there would be equivalent to providing what would be in a good quality hay versus a dormant crop residue. So that was the difference there. So you just have to look at what the recommendations are in Cowbites. So sorry, I can't answer that one specifically. I'm not a Cowbites wizard. Okay,
maybe that might be something that we can get Barry to look into for us.
Yeah, for sure. And that's certainly a change, like in the nutritionists that we work with, like certainly very, very progressive, because that mid-gestation, it's like, oh yeah, we can just coast. And it's like, well, there are some trade-offs, right? And it comes down to what, feed costs are an important factor to control, but just where your trade-off is. And for us, retaining replacements in our herd, we certainly want to make sure that we're getting those heifers, calves especially, off to the best start as possible. And not a knock against the bull calves. We want them to do well wherever they end up. But just looking at the potential returns on investment for those types of supplements.
Okay, thanks, Mara. Maybe, like I said, Jackie, maybe we can get Barry to answer that question, because I feel like there's probably going to be, like, that was something that was interesting to me too. So I think there's probably more of us that would like that answer.
Yeah, because it's like when you look at what's laid down in that calf by the end of second trimester, right? Their total number of muscle cells and fat cells is already determined at that point in utero. And also the total number of oocytes that are on that calf's ovaries, right? That's determined by the end of second trimester. You know, those muscle cells and fat cells go on to hypertrophy or get bigger, but you know, both are total reproductive lifetime success. You know, how many eggs that heifer has, and you know, the ultimate eating experience of that animal based on muscle cells and fat cells is determined. You know, that feeling determined by the end of second trimester. So yeah, it's certainly no free lunch during that time either. But yes, please ask a nutritionist.
Okay, thanks, Tamara. The next question comes from Hank Jensen. It says, at what age does vaccination threshold in maternal antibodies usually occur in calves?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit general rules of thumb. It does vary a bit by the disease agent that we're considering and the amount that they got to start off with and how much they're consuming, right? Like if they're facing disease. But generally, by the time a calf is 60 days old, about half of them will respond to systemic vaccination. Usually between 3 and 5 months is when maternal antibodies have greatly waned. So that's systemic vaccination. When we look at the mucosal vaccination, so doing intranasally, we can do that. We don't have maternal antibody interference in the nasal passages. So we're able to come in right at, you know, day 0, day 1, and administer it then and get an effective response.
Okay, so this is a question that I have to do with what you just said. So is there a huge price difference between an intranasal vaccine and the other kind?
No, like I think, so when we look at our different combinations, right? So we have Enforce 3, when you look at the, in combination, so if you looked at Bovishield Gold 1 shot, that covers all 5, and so there's Enforce 3 and 1 shot BVD, those two added together are the same price as a dose of Bovishield Gold 1 shot, roughly. Like there's probably, you know, some cents difference, but it's not magnitude difference. Like your Enforce would be lower cost than injectable that have broader coverage.
Okay, we have another question. What is the ideal age for calves to receive systemic vaccinations?
Yes, so generally around that 3 months of age is ideal for systemic vaccination because their maternal antibodies will have waned, and you have, you know, a larger population of calves that will respond to a systemic vaccination. But often what is best biologically is less feasible logistically, right? Like to not be able to, you know, turn calves out, or, you know, where you have them on pasture when they're 3 months old, or, you know, there's just all these other factors, people wanting to get out into the field. You know, we're always trading off of that. But if you're just looking at when is the best time for them to get a first dose of an injectable, it would be 3 months of age.
Thank you. I'm out of questions for a second.
All right.
Okay, I'm just
No,
gonna
these are all good questions.
Missed anything.
You know, in case, you know, while we're waiting, if anybody, you know, wants to jump in the chat and take a guess as to what's in my cup tonight. You know, especially, I guess if I let it out of the bag that I have a calving date in July, that might change some people's responses. But it's a lemon ginger tea that I'm working on this evening. You know, in days gone by, it might have been something different, especially during calving season. But a lemon ginger for me this evening.
Excuse me, can I add something?
Please do, yeah.
Actually, on Tuesday, Barry, he's going to be in Statler Auction Market. So if you have any question, you can come and ask him anything about cow bites and anything about nutrition, and we will cover the cost. So you don't have to pay from your pocket. Yeah, we got a project funded by the government.
Right on. And yeah, like, and just this mid-gestation protein supplementation idea, that does represent a shift in thinking. So, it might be an interesting conversation, and I'd be interested to learn what Barry has to say about that as well.
Okay. And one more thing I want to mention to all participants, please go on our website and fill out the survey and let us know what do you want us to do in our area, like in terms of extension, what kind of events we have to bring it to the public. So please fill out and give us some guidance. We are here for you. So please do it. Thank you.
Okay, we have some more questions rolling in here, Tamara.
Oh, good. Yeah. Okay. No, it's just lemon ginger tea. There's no kickers in it, in case that's one of them.
I thought maybe it was like a trick question when you asked that at the beginning. Okay, and so it says calf that was stressed then would benefit from an intranasal vaccine.
Yes. Yeah. These ones, Enforce is well, a nice touch, or a good mitigator, because it has the ability to work and help overcome those ones that are, shore up the defenses. And then also, it has that activity against the viruses that it's labeled for, but it also helps with just straight immunomodulation. So, upregulating how that immune system responds. So it's kind of multifaceted. So yeah, stress calves, colostrum and an intranasal is a good way to go with them.
Okay, perfect. This one is from Eric Rodbang. It says, what brand of vaccine do you recommend?
Well, I guess it depends on, that's a good question. I know who signs my paychecks, Eric, but I know what we've used here. I think some important things to consider is understanding the efficacy of the different products that you use. And for your cow herd, you want to make sure that there's a fetal protection claim on there, because not every product that's out there has a fetal protection claim. And so when you look at the products that are available on the market that have the best fetal protection claims, you're looking, at either a Bovashield Cattle Master from Zoetis or Express from Boehringer. So those would be the two of choice for me. And when in practice, those were the ones that were my go-tos for the cow herd. And then when you look at intranasal vaccines, there's distinct differences. Like, Enforce is the only viral one on the market currently. And what I really appreciate about Enforce is the strains in there are temperature sensitive. And so that means that they don't replicate at body temperature. So they remain isolated to the nasal passages. So you don't have to worry about inducing systemic disease with an intranasal Enforce. And so that's great for the safety of the baby calf, but also if you have cows that are unvaccinated or pregnant, it's safe to use around them. So, when it comes to an intranasal viral vaccine, Enforce by far and away is my recommendation. And that's independent of me working for Zoetis. I've just come to appreciate the nuances of it more as I've gotten to learn more about the product. And then when you're looking at scours vaccines, it's really, you need to look at when you can get those cows home to vaccinate them. For us, we like to keep our cows out on pasture and their winter feeding grounds as long as possible before bringing them home, because once we bring them home to vaccinate, then they're home. So what I really like about the Scour Guard in that situation is that you get a quick response to that product. You do have to get it closer to calving. So, that's a trade-off for some, but for us, that works well. If you need that longer interval, Scour Boss has, that 9-week label. So you want to make sure that you give your cows enough time. And then Bobliss Guardian, it's it's intermediary. So it really depends on what you're wanting to do timing wise. But it is important to overlap when those peak levels are hit with when your cow is building colostrum. So yeah, that becomes a personal thing, you know, and there's a little bit difference in the lumps and bumps that you'll see on your cattle. You know, the ones that you can administer further away from calving often have an oil-based adjuvant, and those tend to be more reactive. So you do see more lumps with them than with the aqueous-based adjuvants, like in scour guards. So, you know, if you have show animals, or, you know, you're seeing lots of lumps and bumps, and that's, you know, giving you pause, there's some different options available there. So I think the biggest question beyond brand and you know, what the efficacy is in terms of fetal protection is deciding whether you're going to vaccinate or not, and then how you administer, like that you administer it well, and that you don't freeze the vaccine prior to administration, and that you get it in a good spot, you know, in the location that they say, whether it's IM or sub-Q. So I think there's some important factors on the administration side, you know, one, whether we give it or not, and two, how we give it, as important as the vaccine brand choice itself. So a few things to consider. But if my boss is listening, Zoetis all the way.
Okay, so the next question is the cost difference between intranasal vaccines compared to injectable. We kind of touched on that a bit already, maybe, I think, since then.
Yeah, because it's really like, when you look at it, the combination of what the different components in there that are providing coverage. So generally your intranasal, just product for product, is going to be lower cost than the injectables. So.
And so if you did an intranasal, say like when they were really young, like within those first, you know, like 30 days or something, and then at branding, then would you still do like a Bovishield one shot, or then would you, and then it's kind of like a booster then almost? Is that
so like there's, you know, really, like if you give them Inforce at birth and then you're branding in that 60 to 90 days of age, you could do a Bovishield Gold one shot, like a systemic combo at that age and expect a good response. Or you could come back in and do an Inforce and one shot BVD, so that you're covering the same antigen and you get a booster response. So you could do either way. It is important to know that a single dose of Inforce when they're very young won't last the entire nursing period. You do need to boost it in some fashion. So whether with a second dose of intranasal, or following up with a combo injectable, you do need to come in at branding time and do that. So there's some different options that, depending, on how old your calves are, you know, what your branding crew can handle in terms of different products, you know, because it is, one more thing to keep track of when you're dividing, and, you know, if you have a Clostridial, a one-shot BVD, and an Inforce. So, but largely what determines it is, when we talked about that dominant antigen interference, the first time a calf sees IBR as an injection, it selectively responds to that. When we have put Inforce on board, we get around dominant antigen interference. So if they have Inforce as intranasally, so if they've had it as, you know, a day-old calf, by the time you get to branding and you give them an injectable, we don't have dominant antigen interference anymore, because they've seen that IBR before. And so if you haven't given anything, you know, and branding time is the first time you give them something, it would be better to separate out that IBR intranasally, because then you don't get dominant antigen interference to the other injectables. So Clostridials being important, right? Like sometimes we wonder about their response. So if they haven't gotten anything prior to branding, considering Inforce and one-shot BVD and a Clostridial is a great combination at that age, because then we can really maximize our Clostridial protection and Mannheimia protection to get around dominant antigen interference.
Perfect. The next question, could you explain again the basic definition of dyskocia? New farmers here for interest sake, and this is not a familiar term to me.
Yeah, so dystocia is the Greek term for difficult birth, right? So when they need assistance, right? If the calf is either too large to be delivered in a timely manner, or malpresentation, so if they have a leg back or a head back, anything that prolongs the normal delivery process, right? So when we think about those calves that have a longer birth, they are more stressed, right? Oftentimes there's a certain degree of oxygen deprivation that's involved, and a buildup of metabolites in their system that predisposes them to further issues. So if we can, and in our other calving seminars, we've talked about recognizing when there is difficulty happening and why it's critical to be able to recognize that and then intervene, both for the immediate survival of the calf, but as we discussed today, that long-term impact that not standing and nursing in the first 4 hours can have on their lifetime success. But glad you guys were able to join us tonight as new producers. Wish you all the best. It's a great industry to be part of. I think cows must be a bit of an addiction when you look at what we go through, but I certainly wouldn't trade the lifestyle for anything else. So dystocia, difficult birth.
Perfect. Next question is, do maternal antibodies interfere with clostridial vaccines?
Yes, they do. And so, there's oftentimes that calves are vaccinated young with a 7 or 8 way, but we do need to realize that not all of them are going to respond. Generally, when we look at clostridials, by the time they're 60 days old, about half the calves will have maternal antibody levels dropped low enough that they'll respond. So when you're giving it to anything younger than that, you're going to have proportionally less number of animals that are responding to that vaccine. Generally safe to give it to our younger animals. It certainly happens frequently. I don't think we're inducing any vaccine-related disease by giving it to them younger, but there's certainly maternal antibody interference with the clostridials. But again, having, giving it, if that's the chance you have to, or the time you have to give it to them, and that's when you're handling them, it's certainly better to give it to them and, have the ones that respond versus not doing it at all. But in an ideal world, those calves would be older, in that 3 month range when we see them get that first dose of vaccine.
I'm just reading this next one. It just is saying thank you.
Oh, well, you're welcome. Well,
are you able to see the chat, Tamara?
Let me see now that I can bring it up.
Because there's a few little ones that would maybe you might just want to read later or whatever too. But that's kind of the extent of the questions for this very second. I'm not sure if anybody else has any other questions.
Well, right on. Well, I hope to, maybe see some of you guys out and about at bull sales this spring as circumstances allow. It's always fun to catch up with people that have sat in on one of these sessions, and we get to meet in person, or actually have a face-to-face conversation versus just listening to me. So I look forward to seeing you guys down the road. And if you ever see me out and about, please stop me. I'd love to meet you in person. So, and we can continue to debate anything that is debatable or, just talk about how things are going in your neck of the woods and on your operation. So.
Awesome. Well, that was really great, Tamara. There was a lot of great information. I agree with some of these other comments that it seems no matter how many times we listen to you speak, we always come away with great info and new tools for our toolboxes and whatnot. So it's really great to have you. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for keep asking me. I certainly enjoy it, and yeah, you know, maybe send my husband a support card, because you can imagine he's got a very very critical audience here. So, but he's always happy to talk about what we do here as well. So yeah, it's just fun to be putting things into practice that you know, we've been recommending, or that I've been recommending professionally for years. So yeah, it's I'm struggling right along with you guys through all this stuff. There was a period last year where we ran into you know, March when we were calving, and it was interminable cold where we couldn't get things turned out. And yeah, I was putting cows on fluids, you know, a couple calves a day for the span of a week until we could, and you know, figuring out what we were going to do. And then fortunately things melted off and we were able to get everything turned out. So yeah, certainly struggled along through the trenches with you guys. So I really can relate to what you're all facing. And I hope that the recommendations were fairly practical and gave you some good food for thought and things to go back to your veterinary professional with in terms of discussion, or maybe just validate what you're already doing. So till next time, well, you guys all take care.
Great. Thank you very much, Tamara. We appreciate it.
All right. Have a good night.
Have a good night. Thanks a lot, Tamara and Shayana. Thanks a lot for your cooperation. It's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Take care.
Thank you to everybody for coming as well. We appreciate it.